Is modern Tai Chi crap? It's a bold statement, but first of all, let me explain. The vast majority of people do Tai Chi for health reasons, to feel better, just so that they can have an exercise which moves, improves their relaxation, improves their mobility, and that's not what I'm talking about. Basically, any Tai Chi form you do, if that's your goal, is to have some kind of relaxing, mild form of exercise, any Tai Chi will do, and there's absolutely no issue. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to stop. You don't have to change anything. I'm really addressing the people who are kind of like me, that are Tai Chi nerds, who are more interested in taking their Tai Chi practice a step further, and are interested in knowing the roots of Tai Chi, the real core principles of Tai Chi in order to do it correctly. So that's what I'm talking about. So it doesn't apply to, I would guess, a good 60, 70, 80% of the people doing Tai Chi today. It is, no matter what, like I said, it's a good, healthy exercise that everybody should be doing. But the problem is, once you start learning more and going past that particular level, so just the health aspect, health and relaxation, and you read a bit more about the history of Tai Chi and how it's described, where it comes from, and you compare that to how it's practiced today and the principles that we find in a modern Tai Chi practice, you realize that there's a huge gap. And that's what I'm talking about. And what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of Tai Chi being done, which is not very good. And I mean that in two ways. So in one sense, it's not very good because it's not following principles that are grounded in the roots of Tai Chi, meaning Taoism, meaning it's supposed to be martial art, meaning it has a function or has a way of functioning with the body. So there's a biomechanics that's inherent in Tai Chi. So those aspects, right? So the Taoist aspect, the martial art aspect, and the biomechanics aspect are lacking, right? We see that most clearly in push hands, for example, where in some competition, push hands is supposed to be pure yin. So it's only gentle, you're not allowed to push. So that's a failure in the Taoism, right? It's failure of understanding of what yin and yang is supposed to be about. The interplay between yin and yang, the shift back and forth, the fact that, for example, this martial art is called Tai Chi, Tai Chi Chuan. Tai Chi is both yin and yang. So doing push hands where you only use yin, you only use softness, is wrong. It undercuts all of the martial art aspects of it. It means that you're never traveling from yin and yang and back. So you're not moving back and forth. You're not actually doing the full transition of yin to yang and back, because that's the essence of Tai Chi. That's literally the core idea of Taoism, is this transition back and forth, yin to yang to yin to yang. So it's the cycle that's important. It's not just being yin. So that's point number one. So also martial art, you also see a lot of the applications that are demonstrated in a lot of Tai Chi videos that make absolutely no sense. They are wrong. They just don't work. You see people demonstrating extreme positions, oh, you're going to block like this, fully seated onto the front leg, and they block. And that just doesn't work. That just does not work. And there's a lot of people who are just kind of pretending that what they're seeing works, or they have, the other extreme is, the chi blast and things like that. No, it just does not work as a martial art. The applications that are being demonstrated do not work. So there's a problem there. And finally, the biomechanics, where you see some of the forms being performed. And we see an echo in that in push hands, where we are sitting fully onto the front leg, for example. So we're sitting fully into the front leg in push hands or in the applications. That's a terrible position to be in. And we're learning to be in these positions through repetition, through the form and also in push hands. But all you have to do is watch fights from MMA or any kind of sport combat, whether it's taekwondo, karate, and all that. Anybody who's seated onto the front leg and stays there is going to get beaten, because the simplest thing to do is you keep hitting that front leg. And if your weight is on that front leg, you can't move fast enough to get out of the way of a kick. And there's video after video showing guys who lose fights simply because they were on their front leg and their opponent just kicks and kicks and kicks that front leg over and over again, and they can never get out of that because there's too much weight on that front leg. So being front-legged is a terrible thing to do tactically if you're interested in the martial art of it. But the problem is we see it in the push hands, and we see it in the form where you're seated onto that front leg, and that's where everything happens, right? So you're moving, it's very pretty, it's very nice. And again, if you're only doing it for movement, for the exercise of it, for the relaxation, that's fine, right? That's not what I'm having an issue with. Again, for us Tai Chi nerds, but being front-legged like that, fully seated onto that front leg, or even 50-50, that's equally bad, because you can't move from that position. You can't step from a 50-50 stance. You have to first shift to one side to then move forward or back. So all these issues essentially are pointing at the fact that there's a problem that's fundamental, right? It's not just that some people do bad Tai Chi. It's the fact that there's the basic premise on which Tai Chi is being done right now is wrong. That's the problem. It's not individual teachers. It's not individual styles. It's the fact that we're doing Tai Chi in a way, or the principles that we're using to do Tai Chi are wrong. And there's a reason for why they're wrong, which is why, again, this is not singling out anybody. There's a history that leads us to this point, and that's what I'm interested in, because I want to trace our way back so that we can look again at what the basic principles should be, so that we can improve our practice. So that's really my point, and that's why I'm saying right now our Tai Chi is crap, and we have to kind of face that. We have to realize that we can't delude ourselves and keep telling ourselves, oh yeah, this is Tai Chi, it's a fantastic, it's a fantastic martial art, blah, 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 blah. No, it's not. And it hasn't been for a while. And it's up to us because now we have access to actually a lot more information than the previous generation, right? Because one of the issues, the reason why we're where we are, is that the previous generation of Tai Chi teachers, Westerners who learned Tai Chi, learned it from Chinese teachers. And so, first of all, there's an element where, from a Chinese perspective, you don't really question your teacher. Your teacher is your master, and you just kind of learn, and you trust that your master knows what they're talking about. And so you learn, and you shut up, and you don't really ask questions. So that's, the teachers were coming from that tradition. The Western students came in and absorbed that idea because the teachers were not going to just respond to questions. But on top of that, there was a kind of cultural disadvantage for the Western students because they were learning something which is completely alien to them. So they couldn't even ask the right questions, right? So if somebody talks about, Chi flow, well, if you're in that first generation, it's the 70s, like my teacher in the 70s went to Taiwan to study. If his teacher, who happens, thankfully, happened to be a fantastic Tai Chi teacher, but if your teacher starts talking about Chi flow, and dantians and all that, how can you even begin to know whether or not what your teacher's telling you is correct? There's no reference point in a Western culture for any of that. So you have to just go, oh, okay, this is what it is. This is what Qi is, according to Chinese tradition, and et cetera, et cetera. So our teachers didn't even know what questions to ask. And on top of that, culturally, asking questions was not something which was actually highly regarded. So then those teachers taught us, the next generation. And our advantage is that now we have access to writings that they didn't have access to. We can now go back and read some of the text, some of the Taishi classics. We can read some of the documents about Taoism, the way it was actually practiced, things like that, so that we actually have much firmer ground from which to ask questions. There are now enough people who have done Qigong, who have done meditation, who have done Taoist meditation or Buddhist meditation, that they know what they're talking about, and they can look back and go, wait a minute, that particular practice is crap. All right? So now we're in this kind of, we can look back, and in a strange way, Westerners are in some cases, in a better position to ask questions and to come up with answers than some of the Chinese teachers, because the Chinese teachers come down, again, there's this idea of the lineage and who taught you, and you're repeating essentially what you were taught. So there's a cultural block there. But also, and this is important, Chinese lineages coming out of China come from a very stunted lineage, because China went through the Boxer Rebellion, and then the Communist Revolution, and then the Cultural Revolution, and all these things. At every step of these, every moment of these revolutions, ancient Chinese practices were systematically destroyed. They were books were burned, temples were destroyed, practitioners were hunted and discriminated against. So, in some ways, the Chinese from mainland China have less access to some of their own history than a Westerner or Taiwanese, for example, because you have some of the branches of Tai Chi, but also some other practices. After the Chinese Communist Revolution, fled to Taiwan, so they were never subjected to the Cultural Revolution. So there wasn't this kind of washing away of traditional Chinese culture. So this is why you have some deeper roots in Taiwan in terms of Chinese culture than you have coming out of mainland China. Now, a lot of things have changed, so now there's starting to be a lot more research into some of these old texts, which is why I'm saying that we actually have more access to information than our teachers, right? They had to rely on what their Chinese teachers were saying, and what their Chinese teachers were saying was not always very good or very well informed. It was, again, like I said, it went through the filter of all of these revolutions. And that's the problem. So that's why I think now we're in a position where we can go back and look at a lot of this and come up with better answers than our teachers, because we can ask better questions. And that's the really important part. And that's what I want to do, because I don't claim to necessarily, I'm not a historian, but I do think that just from the information we have access to and from the form itself, we can come up with better questions and better answers to make our Tai Chi better. But before we do that, we have to accept the fact that the Tai Chi that we're doing today is not very good. And there's a reason why it's not very good. And if those are the reasons that we need to find, and if we do, then we can have better Tai Chi. So that's the step. So that's what I'm talking about. Again, this concerns the small minority of Tai Chi nerds who are actually interested in the minutiae of all of this, the details of the history of Tai Chi and how it's supposed to be practiced. For everybody else, do the Tai Chi that fits you, that resonates. It's going to be a wonderful health practice, no matter which form you do. So this is not a call to just drop whatever you're doing. If you're getting benefits from your practice, keep doing it, right? But if you have that little voice in the back of your head going, yeah, this is not quite right, this is not the full thing, then that's what I'm going to be talking about, okay? So that's it. Keep on doing Tai Chi, and I'll see you in the next video.